Have you ever asked yourself what depression really is? Not what they told you in the offices, not what you read in the articles about mental health, but what it really is. What if depression isn't a disease, but an alarm? The last desperate scream of your soul before it dies completely from within. Think about it. You wake up every day with no will to live, feeling nothing, empty, as if you died inside but your body keeps functioning. And they tell you it's just low serotonin, just brain chemistry. But what if it's something far deeper? What if your soul literally prefers to die than to keep living a life that isn't yours? Today, we're descending into the abyss of depression, and I warn you, what you're about to discover won't comfort you, won't give you cheap hope, but it might be the only thing that saves you. Because the truth about depression isn't in the offices, isn't in the pills. It's in what you've been avoiding looking at all along. Let's start by destroying the most dangerous narrative about depression. The story they tell you is simple, comforting even. Depression is a disease like any other. It's brain chemistry. It's not your fault. Take these medications, do therapy, and you'll get better. And look, I'm not saying neuroscience is a lie. I'm not saying medications don't work for some people. But here's the problem. This explanation is incomplete, because it gives you comfort, but robs you of the truth. It turns depression into a passive condition, something that happened to you, something external, something you have no control over. And that's dangerous, because as long as you believe depression is just chemistry, you'll never look at the real reason your soul is dying. Think about it. Why do some medications work for a while and then stop? Why do some people do years of therapy and remain empty? Why can you have everything, money, relationships, career, and still feel like nothing matters? Because depression isn't just a problem in the brain, it's a problem in the soul. And the soul doesn't heal with serotonin. Carl Jung, the psychologist who mapped the depths of the human psyche, understood this better than anyone. Jung didn't see depression as a disease. He saw it as a symptom. Symptom of what? Of a soul that has been betrayed. Of a life being lived inauthentically. Of a psyche that's screaming, "This isn't who you are, stop!" He called this the dark night of the soul. A period where everything you built, your identity, your beliefs, your social mask, begins to crumble. And you know what's most frightening? This isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the psyche trying to kill you symbolically, so you can be reborn. But nobody tells you this, because it's easier to give you a pill and send you back to the life that's killing you than to tell you the brutal truth. You need to die to be reborn. Not literally, but symbolically. The false you, the one who lives to please others, who suffocates your real desires, who pretends to be who you're not, that one needs to die. And depression? Depression is the funeral. But why doesn't anyone talk about this? Why does the dominant narrative insist on reducing depression to brain chemistry? Because the truth is inconvenient. The truth demands responsibility. The truth demands change. The truth demands that you look in the mirror and admit, I betrayed myself. And that's unbearable for most people. Søren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher, described this with brutal precision. He called it the despair of not being oneself. He said that most people live a borrowed life. They follow the script that was written for them, by their parents, by society, by culture. They choose the right career, the right relationship, the right life. But deep down, they know. They know they're living someone else's life. And this knowledge corrodes from within. Because you can fool others. You can even fool your conscious mind, but you cannot fool your soul. And when the soul realizes you betrayed it, when it realizes you chose comfort instead of authenticity, it begins to die. And you call this depression. Kierkegaard said there are 3 forms of despair. First, despair of not knowing you have a self. You live on autopilot, never question anything, follow the herd. Second, despair of not wanting to be yourself. You know who you are, but you reject it because it's frightening, because it doesn't fit, because it requires courage. Third, despair of wanting to be yourself but not being able to. You try, but the chains are too strong. Fear paralyzes, and you give up. And in all these forms, depression. Now comes Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher of the abyss. Nietzsche said something radical. God is dead, and we killed him. He wasn't talking literally about religion. He was talking about meaning. Humanity killed its old structures of significance. And now? Now we live in a void, without transcendent purpose, without a greater narrative, without reason to exist beyond existing. And this void? This void is modern depression. Nietzsche called this nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, that everything is meaningless, that life is a bad joke. But here's Nietzsche's revolutionary insight. Nihilism isn't the end, it's the beginning. It's the necessary collapse before reconstruction. He said you need to go through the death of the ego, through the destruction of everything you believed, to then create your own values, to become what he called Übermensch, the overman. Not a superhero, but someone who no longer needs external crutches to give life meaning, someone who creates their own meaning. But most people never get there, because they get stuck in nihilism, in the void, in depression. They accept the death, but never get reborn. And you know why? Because rebirth hurts. Rebirth means abandoning everything that gave you security. It means facing the unknown. It means looking into the abyss and saying, okay, I don't know who I am. I don't know what matters, but I'm going to find out. And that's terrifying. So you stay in depression, because at least it's familiar. At least you know this pain. Albert Camus, another philosopher of the absurd, understood this perfectly. He wrote about Sisyphus, the man condemned to roll a boulder up a mountain, only for it to roll back down eternally. And Camus asks, why doesn't Sisyphus kill himself? Because even in an absurd universe, even in a life without objective meaning, you can still choose. You can choose to embrace the absurd. You can choose to keep rolling the boulder, knowing it's absurd, but doing it with awareness, with rebellion, with dignity. Camus said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his life got better, but because he accepted the absurd nature of existence and chose to live anyway. And this acceptance? This is the way out of depression. Not cheap hope, not false positivity, but conscious confrontation with brutal reality and the choice to continue anyway. Now comes the part nobody wants to hear. The part that will make you want to close this video. But if you've made it this far, it's because some part of you needs to hear this. So take a deep breath. You created your own depression. Not entirely, not consciously, but you participated. Every time you ignored your intuition, every time you chose comfort instead of truth, every time you stayed in a job you hated because you need to pay the bills, every time you continued in a dead relationship because you've already invested so much time, every time you swallowed your words because you don't want to cause conflict, you betrayed your soul. And it warned you. It always warns. First with anxiety, then with restlessness, then with insomnia. But you ignored it. So it went further. It took away your will to live. Because if you're not going to truly live, why live at all? Jung said something most people don't understand. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Let me translate. Depression is the psyche's way of avoiding real suffering, the suffering of changing, of growing, of facing who you really are. Because change hurts. Losing your identity hurts. Admitting you wasted years living wrong hurts. So what does the psyche do? It creates depression. Depression paralyzes you, puts you in a fog, leaves you in limbo where you don't have to make difficult decisions. It's a comfortable prison. You suffer, but you don't grow. And you know what's most frightening? you can stay there forever. Many people do, decades in depression, because it's easier than doing what needs to be done. Which is what? Die symbolically. Martin Heidegger, German philosopher, had a concept called being toward death. He said most people live running from death, running from finitude, living as if they had infinite time. And this escape? It creates an inauthentic life. Because when you don't face your mortality, you don't value your life. You postpone, you procrastinate, you pretend you'll get another chance. But you won't. You have this life, now. And when you truly accept this, when you accept that you're going to die, that time is limited, that there's no second chance, everything changes. You stop living other people's lives. You stop pretending. You stop waiting for permission, and you start living authentically. But before getting there, you need to go through symbolic death. You need to kill the false self, the ego you built to survive, the mask you wear to be accepted. And this process, it's painful. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. But it's not linear, it's not pretty, it's chaotic, it's dark, it's lonely. You'll lose people, you'll lose certainties, you'll lose the version of yourself you knew. And for a while, you'll feel like you're dying, because you are. But this death, it's necessary, because on the other side of it is rebirth. So how do you get out of depression? Not the way they sold you. Not by taking pills and hoping to feel better. Not by faking positivity. Not by doing therapy forever while avoiding real changes. You get out by confronting. Confronting the brutal truth you've been avoiding. You're not living your life. And as long as you don't change this, depression will continue. Because depression isn't the problem. It's the symptom. The problem is the false life you're living. So here's what you need to do, and it won't be easy. 1. Sit in silence. No distraction, no music, no phone, just you and your thoughts. And ask, if I could live any life without fear of others' judgment, without fear of failing, what would it look like? And listen. Don't answer with your head. Listen with your soul, because the answer is already there. You're just afraid to hear it. 2. Identify the lies. What lies are you living? I need this job. I need this person. I need to be like this to be loved. Are they truths? Or are they fears disguised as reasons? Write. List. See the chains you created yourself. 3. Choose conscious death. Decide what needs to die. Maybe it's a relationship that died years ago, but you're holding the corpse. Maybe it's a career that was never yours, but what your parents wanted you to be. Maybe it's a version of you that no longer exists, but you insist on pretending it still is. Let it die, consciously, with pain, with mourning, but let it go. Because as long as you hold the dead, the living has no space to be born. 4. Be reborn. And here's the truth nobody tells you. You won't be reborn knowing who you are. You'll be reborn discovering. It's not a destination, it's a journey. Nietzsche said, become who you are. Not discover who you are, as if it were something fixed, waiting, but become, create yourself, build yourself. You don't find your purpose, you create it. And this requires courage. Courage to try and fail. Courage to be judged. Courage to be alone if necessary. Courage to live without guarantees. But you know what happens when you do this? Depression doesn't go away because you healed. It goes away because you stopped living the life that caused it. So now the choice is yours. You can close this video and go back to the comfortable narrative. Go back to the idea that depression is just chemistry, that you just need the right medication, the right therapy, and everything will work out. And maybe it will, for a while. But deep down, you'll know. You'll know you're avoiding the truth. Or you can do something radical. You can look at your life today, honestly, without filter, and ask, is this really mine, or am I living someone else's script? This job, did I choose it or accept it because it was safe? This relationship, Is it still alive, or am I holding a ghost? This version of me, is it who I am or who I learned to pretend to be? And if the answer hurts, good, because pain is the sign that you're finally waking up. Jung said, "There is no light without shadow, no psychic wholeness without imperfection." You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be honest. Honest with yourself. And when you do this, when you stop running from brutal truth, depression stops being a prison and becomes a portal to the death of the false you and the birth of the real. Now go, take a deep breath, and choose. Will you keep dying slowly in a life that isn't yours? Or will you have the courage to die once and for all, to finally be reborn?